Good afternoon and welcome everyone to this first inaugural session of the Circular Economy Research Network Asia Pacific. We have a number of conferences that are scheduled later this year, but this is the start of the first of the series. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ushai Raniga, and I'm Professor of Sustainable Built Environment at the School of Property Construction and Project Management at RMIT University. I'm also co-lead of the Circular Built Environment Program, hosted by the United Nations Environment Program and sitting under the umbrella of the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction. The Circular Economy Research Network is partnered between 4 institutions: RMIT University, Monash University, the CSIRO, and Swinburne University of Technology. I'd like to start off with an acknowledgement to country. RMIT and I'm sure my other partners agree, that we would like to acknowledge the First Nations lands on which we are conducting this virtual seminar today. In particular, I'd like to pay my respects to the Wuiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation, on whose unceded lands the university conducts its business, but also where I'm speaking to you from today. In light of the conversations that we're going to have today, both from a sustainability perspective, as well as from a circular economy perspective, I'd like to remind ourselves about Dumbali, or the promise or commitment in the First Nations language, and the promise that we are making to Bunjal's law, which is about the First Nations law, where we promise not to harm children, the lands and waters on which we conduct our business. We commit to sharing in the language of the Kulin Nation and use this as a way to welcome and provide a culturally safe environment in which we are going to be talking today. So what is CERN APAC? As you can see, we've got a vision and mission on the screen. The vision of CERN APAC is to ultimately follow the principles of circular economy, where we are decoupling resource use from the environmental impact that we have. We don't believe in the creation of waste. We want to use resources over and over again. And we use an economic system which is effective and efficient unless and until the resources that are already in the system can be used to their maximum potential over and over, so that they are used over multiple life cycles. Our mission is to foster the undertaking of a rigorous research that accelerates the adoption of impactful circular economy policy. So we're really interested in the impact rather than just research for the sake of research. We want to see as much as possible an impact across policy, development of strategies and practices, not just in Australia and New Zealand, but across the Asia Pacific region. So who's involved in the CERN APAC? As I said before, there are 4 institutions that are part of the founding network of Circular Economy Research Network Asia Pacific. Our founding members are myself. I'm the chair for 2025, but I've been ably supported by my team at RMIT University, one of whom you see on the screen here, Akwan Gajanayake. From Monash University, where we started this work between RMIT and Monash University in 2022, we've been supported by Associate Professor Glenn Croy and Professor Amrik Sohal. And later on, we've also had the support of Rob Rowan and Martin Giesdorfer from MSDI, the Monash Sustainable Development Institute. From CSIRO, we've got Dr. Heinz Schandl and Dr. Colleen McMillan. From Swinburne University, Andy Nygaard, Magnus Molia, who's not here today, and Olumide Shitu. We've also got a number of different research members and streams across CERN APAC. At the moment, we've got 12 streams, some of which are more active than others. And we've got over 240 members across these 12 streams. We've also got a website, and I would encourage you to look into our website. It'll give you an understanding of who's involved, the different streams, and also the different continual seminars that are to come. This website is currently under development, so please make sure that you visit this website often so you're updated. As I said before, we have a continual conference series, and today is the first of them. We have a conference coming up in April on textiles, the 22nd of April. We've also got one on policy, governance, and resource stream, plastics and packaging, water stream, food and organic stream, and our closing session taking place in October. I'll now stop sharing my screen so we can have a quick poll on Menti to enable us to understand from which part of the world you're joining us today. So there are two ways you can join us on this Menti poll. One way is to use your QR code if you've got a smartphone, or the other way is for you to join www.menti.com and enter the code that you've got on the screen, 14568294. We've also dropped the link in the chat for you, www.menti.com, and the code is 14568294. Also, a reminder that if you have any questions while the keynote or the panelists are speaking, please remember to drop them into the chat so that we can pick them up as part of the facilitated discussions. Australia. We have 89 participants, so maybe just wait a little bit longer. Okay, we might move along now because we don't seem to be getting too many responses. The next question is, what background of work do you come from? 5 different options provided. Many from research. Yet another question. What aspect of the circular economy do you work in? This is interesting. Many working in recycling. Okay. It's good to see that people are working in rethinking as well, and not just in recycling. Reuse, yes. Reduce. Few in remanufacture. 1 in refurbish. This is interesting. Keep them coming. This is really interesting information. Right, I think we've got the maximum under rethink. And then we have recycle. It's great. Doesn't look like we've got any more coming. So Alston, if you want to move to the next screen.
That was the end, Usha.
Okay, so I'll share my screen again. I'd like to now introduce the panelists, and I would request the panelists to please show their video as I introduce you. Our first panelist is Lynette Chia, who is Professor and Chair of Sustainable Transport from the University of Sunshine Coast, where she leads the Sustainable Mobility Research Lab, developing data-driven models and tools to reduce environmental impacts of passenger and freight transport. Welcome, Lynette. Our next speaker is Associate Professor Hong Quan Nguyen from Vietnam National University, where he's a Director for Circular Economy Development in Ho Chi Minh City. He has an interest in inter- and transdisciplinary study on sustainability-related subjects and has authored many Scopus Index papers and is also an editor of several journals. I'd like to now introduce Tanya. Tanya works for Becker and is a civil engineer, has been working in circular economy for over 25 years. And she has been working in circular economy since 2020 and has incorporated circular economy thinking, particularly with with First Nations perspective in her work at Becca and in New Zealand. Welcome, Tanya. Our final speaker is Associate Professor Junming Zhu, Associate Professor and Associate Dean at the School of Public Policy and Management at Tsinghua University, where he's also the Associate Director of Tsinghua's Institute for Sustainable Development Goals and Editor-in-Chief of the journal Industrial Ecology. His research focuses on policy analysis and governance concerning the environment and development. Welcome. So a very hearty welcome to all our panelists. Thank you for taking the time and the effort today. I'd like to now welcome our keynote, Ashok Khosla. Ashok is involved with the Development Alternatives and Hydropower Sustainability Alliance. Ashok is going to talk about the importance of circular economy in the Asia-Pacific region. Ashok has had a long history in looking at sustainability and cultural, and particularly the aspects of cultural sustainability. Ashok has been a pioneer looking at his role in the UN's International Resource Panel. He's been the president of the International Union for Conservation of Nature and the president of the Club of Rome. Ashok has been on India's National Security Advisory Board and Scientific Advisory Council. He's been awarded the Order of the British Empire by the UK government. With that, I'd love to welcome Ashok. Over to you, Ashok. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Usha. May I start by sharing my screen? Let me see if I can get it right. Here we are.
We can see your screen, Ashok.
You can? Good, good. I'm going to try and give a little bit of my understanding of what the circular economy idea means to the Asia and Pacific region, and this region being perhaps more varied and diverse than most regions. I'm going to have to take a small part of it to exemplify the issues that I'm most concerned with. So let me just start. Do you, I am stuck on this. It's not moving.
You should be able to move it from your.
Is that it?
You can see it now. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so you can see that in the last 50 years, the kind of resource use has been exploding in terms of not just the growth of construction materials, which has been huge, ores and minerals, and fossil fuels, and biomass, and generally material extraction has gone up by a factor of 4, and so have the GHG emissions in this region. And the causes, of course, are massive growth of population, economic activity, and modernization. The use of resources and economic growth are pretty highly correlated and don't show any signs of separating. This is a graph of the vertical axis is the metabolic rate in terms of material per capita per year, and the x-axis is the GDP per capita. And if you look at this, it's quite interesting for our region. You look at various users. If you're above the line, you are essentially more resource intensive than the average, and you're below the line, you are actually somewhat more conservative. And if you look at the different countries in our region, you see that we actually straddle virtually the whole spectrum, with India more or less at the bottom and somewhat resource conservative, and Japan more or less at the top in the region and very conservative. But there's in between, there's Vietnam, Thailand, China. And you can see how resources have been gaining strength. The facts that we cannot ignore are that in the next, in this half century that we're in the middle of, the population is going to grow by about 1.7 billion. The per capita consumption will quadruple. Poverty and hunger in our region are quite endemic, particularly in the western part of our region. And inequality and social tensions are growing quite strongly. And our land and soils throughout the region are taking quite a beating. More than 60% are said to be degraded in one form or another. And that applies also to our forests and rivers. These are just a few quick numbers. The annual incomes vary from something like about $1,000 per capita per year in one part of the region, and they go all the way up to $84,000 US dollars per capita per region per year in Singapore. So we have a range of incomes sort of of the order of 50 times from the bottom to the top. The average per capita material use is also quite diverse, ranging from around 3 to 30, 35. Again, a range of 10 times, and different parts of the region show very different approaches. And the same applies to waste generation, which has a range of around 20. Waste recycling, percentage of waste recycled, is also very, very different in different parts of the country, of the region. So we have three parts of this region, if you look at all these factors. One is what we might call the developed countries, which is Japan and Australia and New Zealand particularly. And then you have the emerging countries, mainly China. And then you have the very poor countries in the South and Southeast Asia, which are really at the bottom end of the ladder, climbing up and expecting to have a lot more use of resources. I'm going to talk about South Asia because, number one, because I know it best, and secondly, I don't think in the 20 minutes I have, I can cover the whole region in its all its diversity. So I thought I would find ways in which, by looking at my own country, India, we might be able to get some lessons for circularity. India is, like many of the other countries, two countries in one. About 500 million people in India live more or less as well as people in South Europe and Southern Europe and other developed countries. And there are about 900 million people living in the same space at the same time in a country we might call Bharat, which is the Hindi name for India. And these 900 million live very poor, destitute lives. And we need to look at waste from the perception and viewpoint of both different countries. And we need to look at them in a way that gives us some idea of how to manage our resources more rationally. So India, the 500 million who live really pretty well, mostly middle class, have a wonderful life. They've got a consumption society going with beautiful homes, cars, and shopping malls, and lots of food. They live well. they and their children and grandchildren are actually part of the global elite, and we might call them biosphere people, people who have access to resources from the whole of the Earth's biosphere. And they have enough food to even produce some waste. This is a family, some time back, about 20 years ago, would put all their food for 1 week onto a table. And this was done by a photographer called Peter Menzel, who did a wonderful book on how much food people eat in the world. And this is the picture he took for India. And at that time, obviously not meaningful anymore, the food was worth about 1,600 rupees. Our patterns of development are predicated on massive mining of the earth, of achieving great efficiency in production, but mainly by externalizing the costs, and obliterating resources like time into oblivion, because we don't really count it as a resource, and destroying our countrysides. According to UNEP, India's wastelands are growing at roughly 10,000 square kilometers per year, and our wastes are producing huge mountains of landfills. Although now that with new recent policies promoting the circular economy, that should be reduced in the future. Bharat, the country with the 800 or 900 million people, is another story. This is a story of subsistence. And subsistence means that we can't afford to produce many wastes. And it's a subsistence society that really is a recycling and reuse society, scrounging as much as possible out of everything that they have, and using particularly local resources, which we might call ecosystem resources. And so they don't get stuff from faraway places. They need to subsist. Theirs is actually, from 5,000 years, a circular economy already. I mean, they have very little choice but to recycle, reuse, and scrounge whatever waste they have into usable products. And they live very meager lives. In my country, there are probably about 100 million people who do not have adequate drinking water. And circularity is very important in their lives, because with no toilets and with hard to find fuels for their cooking. And here we put a family from a region in central India where we work, my organization works, where we got them to bring out their whole week's food, which you can see, and all 7 of them are actually living on roughly 300 rupees a week. But they're used to recycling. They use their waste for organic fertilizer. Most of their waste is organic and is biomass of some kind or other. And so they know what circularity is, ingrained right into their DNA. The income distribution of India, as well as most of the region, is very skewed. The top 20% probably earn something of the order of 80%, but that was in 1991. This was the cover of the Human Development Report of UNDP. And at that time, in 1991, half the population basically of the country, as well as of the region, as well as of the world, because the region and the country are sort of at this roughly at the center part of the distribution. About half the people basically got something like 7-8% of the revenues. Now, this was in 1991. And the gap has been widening. The rich have been getting richer and the poor have been getting poorer. And now, not now, about 15 years later, in 2007, that champagne glass that I showed you had turned into a bar stool, where we now talk not about 2080, we talk about 1 and 99. 1%, and in fact, some parts of our region, it's 0.1% of the population that gets 90% or 99% of the income. This leads to a massive impact on nature, on resources, and you all know what ecological footprint is, so I won't describe that to you, but it has been growing. Has been growing pretty fast from the end of the war, World War II, when it was probably around 0.4. The current footprint is getting close to 2. And this is obviously not tenable, and that's why we all, poor and rich, have to spend our efforts in making circular economy principles work. This is a graph of the ecological footprint, the bottom at the x-axis, versus the Human Development Index on the y-axis. And if you look at what it means, going to the left, going towards 0, means a good future, the ecological footprint, meaning the legacy that we leave for future generations is better towards the left. And the Human Development Index is what people have today, and that is, as you get up towards higher levels, it is a good today. So the very best quadrant is the very top left corner, where it says 0.9 to 1, and virtually no country in the world has reached the kind of good today with a good future that we could desire. Cuba came close for some years, but even that today is not true. But most countries actually either have sacrificed their future by trying to get good today, the ones particularly at the top right-hand corner, and some have not been able to get their act together, and they have a very poor current and future economy. The rapid changes in technology, in economic instruments, in geopolitics, in awareness and aspirations, of course, and in resource limits, forces us to look at these issues much more closely. This is what you might call an analog of the Kuznets curve. Each country hopes to get from poor and clean to rich and clean, but it usually has to go through a period during which it becomes rich and dirty. We produce more and more stuff and more pollution till we become rich enough to deal with the pollution problems. This has been a historical trajectory that many countries have followed, and presumably future poor countries will try to do the same. But we need now to think about how to not have to go through that period of rich and dirty. And in order for us really to decouple prosperity from dirty development, we have to figure out ways in which to tunnel through. To tunnel through from the left to the right means that we need to figure out ways in which to reduce the impacts of our increasing production and consumption. In the end, both the rich countries in the region and the poor countries in the region will have to converge. I mean, there's no particular justification for such inequalities to exist, either globally or regionally. And if we are going to achieve the desirable sort of average per capita use of resources at, say, around 5 tons. That's a number that comes out of many of our analyses, which is a kind of sustainable use of resources. Then there will have to be contraction among the rich countries and hopefully an improvement, and then contraction and convergence with all the other countries. This is a kind of an ideal future that we all need to aspire to. The global south typically wants to have relative decoupling between GDP and the environmental pressures. That means that the ratio between environmental or other impacts and GDP is going smaller. But in the case of the rich countries, it would need really to be an absolute decoupling in which both the GDP, the environmental impacts, the resource impacts would need to decline in absolute terms. And this is basically the difference between the first group of countries that I was talking about, and that means Australia and Japan, New Zealand, where we need to actually aspire to reducing the current impacts on resources. And in the poorer countries, we need to do a relative decline, not necessarily reduce the absolute amount, but the relative amount. So a circular economy is an ambition that we all need to nurture. It affects our climate, it affects the decarbonization issues that help us manage the climate. The land and water and wastes and materials resources should be a very major part of our thinking. And to decouple by a factor of 10 reduction in all these uses, which I will come to in a minute, with the 10 R's, which I will also just come to. And this means that we can get our resources and our population growth and our environmental issues more or less in balance. So what are the 10 R's? The 10 R's are, in my opinion, refusing and rethinking what is a good life, and refusing to necessarily add more consumption and production to it, to reduce the use of materials, particularly from where they are, to find ways to reuse the products that we have and recycle them into new products where that's not possible, and to use more renewable resources. Then, in addition to that, we have to be mindful of the ecological rucksacks. And if we want to reduce that, I will just explain what that means to anyone who's been left behind on that. And to then go on to more sophisticated ways of prolonging the use of resources in a product by refurbishing it, by remanufacturing it, by repurposing it, and maybe even recovering uses from it. I now want to give you some examples. This is the headquarters of my organization, which is called Development Alternatives. This building was built in 2007, almost 20 years ago. It has had very little need for upkeep and external maintenance, and it's been it's a truly circular economy technology, and I'll try and explain to you why. It reduces the rucksacks, and it uses renewables and local materials, and recycles C&D waste, construction and demolition waste. In this building, we have essentially used totally different technologies. We use a lot of wastes from thermal power stations, what is called fly ash, is a very large component of the building materials. We developed these technologies to essentially recycle wastes into good building material. And it reduces the rucksacks by using things like ferrocement, which uses virtually very, very little steel and cement. And it reduces the amount of materials by hollowing out spaces where materials are not needed for structural strength. And it uses large quantities of renewable materials like subsoil, soils that are not used for food production, topsoils, but soils that contain the right mixture of sand and clay and silt. So this is an example of a building that uses 30 to 50% less steel, cement, fired bricks, and wood than a normal conventional building. And it's a place where, we have very creative young people doing amazing work on circularity. 30% of the materials are recycled materials, and 25% of them are from industrial waste like fly ash and stone dust and broken tiles. So that's one example of circularity in action. And then our organization also works with rural poor farmers, where we have developed what we call triple impact technology packages for farming with low carbon inputs like energy and chemicals, with resource efficient techniques for irrigation and improving soil quality, and using multi-cropping of the right kind to use nature to do the work for you that normally we use tractors and chemicals for. These are small dams. My organization alone has built about 450 of these, and they have a huge ecological and economic impact. The return on investment on one of these dams is more than 400 or 500% per year, because they enable additional crops. So here in this region where these pictures are taken, there was normally 0 or 1 crop, and after the dam, there were 3 crops. And that alone gives you something of the order of 500% returns. In addition, the water recharges the aquifer because by slowing it down, and the aquifer recharge then makes the wells fill up. The local wells nearby villages means that women don't have to walk hours to fetch water. And so you have a huge social impact with the kids being able to have recreation, water for the domestic uses, and all the other things that go with it. With small micro hydro power stations built into these dams, you get energy for pumping more water during the off season. And basically, combined with the fisheries possible, you have what I would call a truly circular intervention. The large quantities of desertification I referred to a little earlier are euphemistically called wastelands. And a very large part of one's hope in the future is to restore these wastelands to their former health. The way we do that is basically to go to the areas where they've been denuded and make contour trenches which ensure that every drop of water during the monsoon rains is kept within that area. And not only are the contour trenches able to retain the water, but on the left you will see a deep trench, which is called cattle proofing trench, which keeps the animals out. And nature is so resilient that the rootstock, the old seeds that are inside the soil, suddenly become very active, and within a year or so, you can actually regenerate a forest with virtually no work or inputs to do that. And very quickly, you become essentially a forested region. This is an alien species called Ipomia. The Indian name, it translates to shameless, because the more you cut it, the more it grows. And we've transformed it into a fuel for a gasifier, which we developed. And that fuel then goes into a diesel engine and produces diesel generator and produces clean electricity. All this from weeds that people don't want. So you have a large number of possible ways of doing this. These are earth block machines, which is just compressed earth, unfired bricks, saving huge amount of carbon emissions, but also a very good building material, which we use in our headquarters. There are other kinds of employment generating technologies like hand looms and paper recycling, in which the impacts on people's lives are huge. In this particular factory you see on the screen, in a period of 21 years, the number of births per woman fell by a factor of 12 compared with the control group in the same community. So you can really see an incredible impact that a job for women can have, not just on their own lives, but also on carbon emissions, because those births that were averted are not going to be needing energy in their lives. So let me just go on to quickly show you how many different ways circular economy can be useful. The 5 kingdoms of nature, biomimicry, is a way of saving resources. This termite on the left, tower on the left, provides us with knowledge about how to circulate air inside a building. And the building on the right, which was designed by a Swedish architect, Anders Nyström, in Harare, in Zimbabwe, the capital of Zimbabwe, is entirely without any air conditioners, because it is air conditioned by the termite principles. And we do the same in our building in Delhi, where inspired by nature, we have airflows and thermal mechanisms that improve our lives. Pulling water out of the air, even in deserts, is a possibility that has been shown by the Namibian beetle. This desert beetle produces large quantities of water simply by letting them condense on its skin. And we have different kinds of technologies for farming, what we might call agroforestry, which have a huge impact on both resources, biomass, as well as on carbon emissions. The population, I am afraid I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip this part. It's simply to show that by creating meaningful jobs for women and by creating better education for girls, the number of people born in a society gets reduced significantly. And therefore, one of the best ways to reduce resource use and carbon emissions is through literacy, education, and jobs for women. And this is something that my organization has spent a lot of effort on, done detailed modeling, systems modeling, and found that it's probably the cheapest way to reduce carbon emissions in the world. I was talking about ecological rucksacks. I just want to explain that when you have a gold ring, you may well say it weighs 20 grams, but its actual weight in terms of rucksacks is 20 tons, because that is the amount of material that was moved in order to make that ring. And it's very important in circularity to see the wider picture and reckon on the total rucksack of each of your missions. There are circularity gains and benefits in redesigning our cities, like what they're doing in, say, Barcelona or in various other cities. And the SDGs are a very good ally for us because of all the 17 SDGs, but 12 relate to circularity in one way or another. They have very deep impact, and we can use that as a very good way of raising support for the work on circularity. I am going to now essentially conclude by saying that we need really to go beyond individual resource thinking to systems thinking if we're going to get it right. When we look at, say, food, we need to look at a large number of other factors like land and water and energy and materials. And in fact, we're not doing that enough. And the pathways to decoupling, both in the rich countries and in the poor countries, is to increase the efficiency and the durability and the product life of the life of products, and through conservation of our resources. Some of the ways to do that in terms of design are miniaturization and dematerialization through substitution, and of course, sharing of underused assets, the Uberization, if you like, of our products. Policy coherence is essential for this, and we tend to think a lot about the technology, but a very large part of the benefits of circularity will only come when we think across sectors and across different parts of the policy-making apparatus. So I want to thank you for your patience. I know I've gone a little bit over my time, but I would like to leave it at that. And I'd be very happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thanks very much, Ashok. That was certainly very illuminating. And thanks again. We do have a question from the audience, but before I ask you to address that question, I just wondered whether anybody in our virtual space was aware, because when you showed the example of the termite building, or building that was designed looking at how termites design their own spaces, that the Council House 2 building in Melbourne was also actually drawn its design influence from termites. And so the South African architect that designed it also used a lot of natural ways in biomimicry to not just design the building, but also operate the building. So my question to you now, and this has come from Nicole Garfano, is framing from the context of the Bharat peoples who are used to and comfortable with circular economy because they have to be living in poverty. What are your thoughts on how to sell circular economy in the modern view that moves on from poverty to supply in our modern lives?
As I said, I'm not sure I understand that question, because circularity is not a top-down issue. It's invented by the rich because they were wasting a lot of resources. The poor don't waste resources; they can't afford to. They're already circular, and it's a mindset that we've got to teach the poor how to be circular. They're already circular. You don't have to teach them anything. They're desperately resource short, and they need to use whatever resources they have to the ultimate, possible benefit. So I'm not sure that I can see how to answer that question, because we need to learn from the poor how circularity works. They're the ones who pioneered it and lived with it for thousands of years. and they know that every little gram of physical resource is meaningful. They don't throw anything away. They have to use it over and over again. So recycling, reuse, repurpose is built into their psyche, into their DNA. If I understood the question right, it's the rich who need to learn from the poor how to do circular economy.
I think that might be what Nicole meant, because circular economy is very much a Western concept. Whereas, as you say rightly, it's being practiced by indigenous peoples and First Nations peoples the world over, because they really didn't have a choice. They took local, used local, and put it back into the
by definition, they're circular. I want to add one more thing, Usha. The issue is that circularity is about resources. It's not so much about people. And I think being a Western or Northern concept, it leaves out the issue of equity. Equity is not an important feature. Now, my presentation, I was trying to show that the poor need to have access to better lives, and circularity doesn't, account for that. We need to figure out ways in which we also incorporate the issue of equity and social justice. At the moment, circularity is about efficiency, about recycling, about reuse, etc., but it's not about improving the lives of people. So you have to factor that into circularity. And I believe that in the Asia Pacific region, we need to share a lot more information from the poor and rich countries between them, among them, because the issue of people's lives, well-being, is not really counting in circularity. And it's got to be central in it. It's got to be the number one priority.
And future generations really can't afford for every other country, well, let's talk about the Asia Pacific region, to follow the same footprint that certainly Australia does or America does. So we have another question, a couple of questions, and then we'll conclude this part of the conversation. There's a question from Ala El Baumi. Apologies if I'm saying your name incorrectly. From your point of view, Ashok, which circular economy practice has the most powerful impact on the SDGs? And which practice you think needs to be the most prevalent?
If you're talking, if the question is about which sector or which technology, then whether you talk about SDGs or you talk about Paris or you talk about climate as being the primary goal, construction is a major user of resources and energy. And it seems to me that building materials is a very strong contender for the big time focus that we need to give to factors that impact both SDGs and the climate part of the SDGs. So I would say power, transport, which come naturally to mind as sectors that need more circularity. In addition to those, I think in our experience, construction and agriculture are the two that have the biggest impact on human lives and on the SDGs. So if you are looking for sort of prioritization, I would say in our region, particularly China's experience, particularly Japanese experience, show that construction can be completely changed. Construction materials, construction design can be completely, and urbanization, to be far more benign environmentally than they are today.
Ashok, we might leave it there. Thanks very much. There are a lot more questions that have come through the chat, and if we have time, we'll go back to it again. But thanks very much for your time, and it has been a really illuminating presentation, and has set the scene really well for our panelists. So if I could now please get our panelists to show themselves. Please put your videos on. I'd like to invite Lynette, Junming, Hong Kwan, and Tanya, please. Just wait a second for Junming to put his video on. Great. Well, thanks once again to our panelists. And maybe we can start the second part of the hour with your views, panelists, on what do you think, okay, I'll just take a step back. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are, the organization that you come from, and what do you think is circular economy from your perspective, from your personal and or professional perspective? Can I start with you, Lynette, please? Thank you. We can't hear you, Lynette. Maybe you're muted?
Hello? Hello?
Yeah, now we can hear you, please.
Better? Okay, sorry for the glitch. Okay, so my name is Lynette Chia. I'm a chair professor of sustainable transport from the University of the Sunshine Coast, and I'm based in Brisbane in Australia. So what circular economy means to me, I guess my role was created actually in partnership with the Queensland Department of Transport and Main Roads. So I collaborate quite closely with this state department. My research interest is in sustainable mobility. So I studied the environmental impact of road transport. Lately, I've been leading projects on transport equity, which was highlighted by Dr. Ashok as being very important, as well as low carbon transport infrastructure. So it's also a fixture in our built environment, transport infrastructure, and I think will be relevant to the people in this audience. So I look at the transport infrastructure design that considers the life cycle carbon emissions or whole life carbon impacts. And by infrastructure, I'm referring to our roads, our tunnels, our bridges, railway tracks, stations, and so on. So these are such important features in our built environment with very long lifetimes, sometimes even permanent fixtures, right? So they need large amounts of material and energy inputs, materials like concrete, asphalt, bitumen, and so on. So infrastructure delivery in growing regions like Asia Pacific, it's a continual process. As populations grow, we need continual investments in these projects to ensure that people and communities remain well connected. We need to keep on maintaining them to make sure the transport system keeps running. So, but this is also challenging because transport infrastructure, at least in Australia, is responsible for 28% of embodied carbon in Australia. So this is the embodied carbon refers to the emissions associated with the construction, maintenance, and end-of-life treatment for these very long lifetime assets. So circular thinking is really an important part of an emissions strategy and our overall strategy. So many efforts are going into reusing materials, using recycled materials, and also thinking about the productivity of materials that are embedded in infrastructure from the early design stages. Yeah, so I hope to discuss more of that in today's panel with you.
Great. Thanks very much, Lynette, for setting us off. Junming, if I could turn to you,
all right.
could you
Thanks,
tell us a
Ashok.
bit
So,
about your
okay, all right. Well, great to see you all. I'm Junming Zhu from Tsinghua University. So I'm an associate professor at the School of Public Policy and Management. I'm also an associate director of the Tsinghua Institute of Sustainable Development Goals. So it's the China hub of the the grant network of United Nations Sustainable Development Solution Networks. So with the School of Public Policy and Management and with the Institute of the SDGs, my research well, has a more of a social science and policy focus on all kinds of sustainability issues, basically on 3 layers. So the first is at the international and the national layer of policy design, policy instrument. So how policies, they interact with each other, how the decision-making process works, so that we can really have some benevolent environmental policies, sustainability policies finally enacted, given that we have our other conflicting demand. So for example, for economic, maybe coordinating, maybe conflicting demand for economic development, for poverty alleviation, and so on. So the second layer of my research is more on the interaction between national and local government in policy implementation. So while I have a focus on environmental policies, we have to admit that local government, they also have to take care of other issues like employment, like other all kinds of feedbacks they have to given to the local public. So how do local government balance their the demand for sustainability for the environment and other demand from the public? So that's the other focus. The third layer is more environmental policy focused. So we look at not only the environmental aspects, the environmental outcomes of so for example, circular economy policies, pollution reduction policies, and so on. But also we look at the cost, economic cost, the equity aspects of those policies to try to have a balance of more balanced, comprehensive evaluation of the policies to be in alignment with the SDGs, the spirit of sustainable development. So I'll stop here. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Junming. Hong Kwan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Should I use my slide or just
If you can share, then you can use the slides.
yeah, I give it like maximum 5 minutes, I think. Okay, hello everyone. Thank you very much, organizer Usha, also for giving this opportunity to share with you what we are doing here in Vietnam. So yeah, I think I will try to share some idea about what we are thinking about circular economy and what we are doing here. Okay, so I think first, in terms of circular economy, from Vietnamese side, we look at circular economy as also one of the top political agenda. Together with digital economy, sharing economy, circular economy is one of the key new economic models. So we are looking at it not only related to resource recovery or waste management, but it's how it integrates into socio-economical development plan. And in this, we also try to link it up with let's say some new agenda related to twin transitions, the net zero commitment, and how we can mainstream circular economy on socio-economical development plan across different sectors, different already existing agenda like green growth, climate change, and also for economic growth, especially for investment or using green finance. And it's also quite driven by international market and international and regulations. Second one is related to science, technology, and innovations. And now Vietnam is pushing science, technology, innovation in also top agenda. Especially we want to increase our economic growth by 10% from next few years until 2040 to overcome the economical gaps. Yeah, so this innovation or science technology also will support the twin transition program. And of course, we still need a lot of policy related to talents management, development, or capacity building in the government, but also business areas. And this is, of course, linked to circular economy, where we try to operating the circular value chains, the value added, especially in agriculture, or also with the digital transformation, digital economy. We also looking at the implementation. I think like the previous professor also mentioned about the gap between national or local implementation. So we also try to work on that as well. How the top visions can be implemented at the local one. So in this, we have to identify the gap. Of course, it's very context specific, political or social differences, and also the political willingness of the local leaders. And the new one, like circular economy, we need the local champions like Department of Science and Technology, and also we need a strong engagement between government and university. So by the way, our university is eco ministry. So we, apart from research teaching, we have a strong collaboration or engagement with national or local government. So we try to support the implementation at the local levels. The last one that we're facing with institutional barriers, because circular economy is new and it's linked to different sector, different levels. So the existing regulation is not really strong enough to have for the implementations. So the regulatory sandbox is a solution that we are trying to implement in order to implement to work on a new project or new circular economy related to circular economy implementation. So we call it the institutional reform to overcome these bottlenecks of the old bottlenecks. So open innovations or living lab is those that we are trying to do in our university. Yeah, so I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Hong Kwan. Tanya, over to you.
Yora, ko Tanya Hyde Takenua. I am based in Aotearoa, New Zealand, in the lovely Bay of Plenty. I am a chartered engineer working for a consultancy called Becker. So we do a lot of engineering in the built environment. And so that's part of my focus. So I actually lead our circular economy services for the built environment. So looking at what we do every day that makes a difference on the ground. So I have a really great team that challenge me on a daily basis around what are we doing, how are we doing things differently. So what are the things that we need to be asking ourselves around that, getting all that wonderful theory into practice on the ground. I also sit on Engineering New Zealand's Climate Action Steering Group. So looking at what do we need to do for our industry, our professionals around what do they need to know, how do they apply it, what are the things they should be thinking about because of the impact they have on the decisions they make every single day. So we heard earlier around the construction industry has a massive role to play. So that's where I'm trying to do that influencing and looking at what are the tools and the resources we should be giving our engineers to make different choices. Our engineers are really smart, they're problem solvers, but we're asking them the wrong questions. So let's get the right questions in there. But also working with schools, so our Mokapuna, our next generations, how do we bring them into the conversation? How do we educate them? So I've been working with a lot of our colleges, that's 13 to 15-year-olds, around what does the circular economy mean? What are the decisions that you can make every day to make a difference? And also, I was really lucky a couple of years ago to go to Europe and look at what are they doing in the Netherlands with Ursula, going that they're taking things to the next level. But for me, I need to take all that information and then put that to the local context. So what I'm focusing on around the circular economy is going, actually, what does that mean for New Zealand? What does that mean for our Indigenous communities? Because as you've heard, the way they think, the holistic view is already there. So how do we help them translate to get the outcomes that they're after? How do they do that storytelling, sharing their knowledge, and getting an economic benefit and the job creation and all those sort of things. So, yeah, for me, it's that theory into practice on the ground, making a difference every day.
Great. Thanks, Tanya. Impact is so critical in anything that we do. I just want to remind the audience that we are encouraging you to put your questions in the chat, so feel free to keep doing that. We will try and address as many questions as possible. But just to get the ball rolling, perhaps I'll start with you again, Lynette. What do you see as a key driver to progress the circular economy transition in your context, which is the Australian context?
Mhm. Yes, I guess the Queensland government here, where I'm based, or the state government, has a waste management and resource recovery strategy. So I think they recognize that large amounts of materials are needed for our built environment. Materials are valuable and finite resources. So they're looking for resource efficiency, resource productivity, minimizing landfill waste, and reducing emissions. Of course, we can also argue for the other benefits that we know can be realized with the circular economy, things like cost savings, securing material supply chains, and creating new jobs. Yeah.
Jinming, I'd like to go to you. You did mention a little bit about China and the work that you do across both circular economy and the SDGs. Would you like to elaborate a little bit more?
Okay, yes. So I think for China, the experience is more on the, well, I would say two factors. The first is policy, and the second is the economy of scale. So on the policy side, I think although the so-called circular economy promotion law was enacted like almost 20 years ago in 2008, the practice was on the policy and the planning was long ago. Like in the 50s, there was already some policies under the name of comprehensive utilization of resources, which provides guidance and subsidies for mining sectors and some industry sectors to reuse the waste. And then in the 80s and 90s, there was the cleaner production, which was also an idea narrative coming from the international society, like the UNIDO and UNEP and World Bank, right? And then there was the cleaner production promotion law on the plant side, and there was the eco-industrial parks, which also was strongly dominated by the local government on the planning side. And then for the past 2 decades, it was the circular economy. So you can see that the scale is always upscaling from the plant industry sector region and then the national circular economy plans. On the other hand, we have to admit, there was the advantage of economy of scale. So China, like some developing countries, we have more than 10 like metropolitan areas with more than 10 or 15 million population, right? So there are a lot of business models that can only be economically viable only in those business models, like reusing all the food waste from the whole city, right? So imagine there was a rural area, it's not possible, right? So and with that scale, you can have a long chain of producing byproducts and producing the new products from the waste.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Jinming. Yes, economies of scale. When I think about a country like China, which is very similar in terms of population to a country like India, and then you compare it to Australia, which is much larger in terms of land area, but much smaller in terms of population. So, the place-based response becomes really critical when you start thinking about how do you respond to this from a circular economy perspective. Hong Kong, I'd like to go to you. Is there anything that you'd like to elaborate further from your presentation of a short while ago, particularly in the context of the sector and or the country perspective that you'd like to highlight to the audience?
Yeah, thank you so much, Usha. And yeah, I think maybe one thing I want to share from Vietnam perspective, I think a circular economy or sustainability is even it's been mentioned quite a long time, but but really awareness or understanding about circular economy in terms of implementation is quite challenging in both from governments and business sectors, especially looking at entrepreneur or some SME, small medium-sized enterprises. So capacity buildings or supporting programs to those sectors is really important. But yeah, and so it's not easy to change the mindset of, let's say, established enterprises. So we are expecting very much the entrepreneurship and how they can do for themselves, but also to support the existing ones. Looking at, for example, new business model at the services for those there. And yeah, and also of course we in the term of government areas, I think we need to build up the capacity to develop, let's say, good policy or regulations. And of course, it's not an easy one. So the trial and errors, or yeah, it's a must. And I think because it's not easy, I think it's but yeah, I think maybe this is one key thing. And maybe another one I think I also like, because you also mentioned about the cultural topic, because circular economy is like more or less from Western based concept. But I think in Vietnam or in Asian countries, the concept of this in terms of the is related to culture or religion is, I think, is there, but we find difficult to really take those value into practice. So, but if now we can try to combine the East and West culture, or including science, but also more local knowledge, for example, to our value, so that we can have to make it more upscaling, or to make it more apply in the society. Yeah, so I think we need to work more, especially on the social aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we'll come back to that, because it's a question from the audience that we can follow through. But Tanya, I'd like to come to you, and I know that you've done a lot of work in New Zealand, particularly from the First Nations perspective, and I just wondered whether you wanted to elaborate on that a little bit more.
Maybe not necessarily for this question, but one thing, so the thing that I feel is one of the biggest drivers for change for the circular part is, so the regulations we can change, the standards we can change, we can put new policies in, we can change our system to be less linear in our assessment of projects and whether they go through or not. But what we're not looking at, and the hard conversations we're not having, is around behaviour change. How do we actually change from the what's in it for me to what's in it for the community? Actually, that's why it comes back to the Indigenous side of things, and especially for Māori, it's around the community and what's in it for the collective, rather than what makes me look good, what makes me look successful, what do I need to buy off Temu just to keep up with the latest trends. The work that I did with schools recently was around, we looked at the mobile phone industry, and they had to come up with a new product that was a circular product compared to what they had. They walked away going, hang on, buying things off Temu to stick all over my mobile phone isn't the greatest answer. Getting a mobile phone every single year just to keep up with the kids is not the greatest thing for the planet. If I want to be a better citizen, I need to think about those impacts. So actually, I think the hard conversation, what we need to look at, is around how do we change the behaviours from the individual what's in it for us to the community side of things. So we are working together, we are dropping our issues with IP, we are having grown-up conversations around risk to look at and make some real change, rather than tweaking around the edges of the system that we know is already broken.
Yeah, great, Tanya. So I might throw this back at you, and this is a question that Nicole asked Ashok and has sort of reframed it. from the perspective of, should the language associated with circular economy be rich versus poor, or should it be something else? And what do you think it ought to be?
I have to go back to Kayakitanga, which is around what it comes from the country that I'm in and the communities that I'm working with, which it talks about guardianship and actually making sure that we have a healthy, thriving planet for our communities. So I am less worried about the name that I give something and more around how do I get that change to happen and for people to care and want to do something differently. I feel that we get caught up in the political football that gets chucked around, and unfortunately we're seeing that right now. But the economy, when you look at circular, makes good sense. What I found really interesting is our Indigenous communities don't follow. For us, it's a 3-year cycle with the politics. They want 100 and a 500-year plan. So how do we change that time frame to get some really good outcomes rather than worrying around how we get caught up in the cycles and pressures? Don't know if that answers Nicole's question, but I'm sure we can have a good yarn afterwards.
Yes, I'm sure, but this is a really interesting point you raise about the political cycles and the socio-cultural considerations when we start thinking about the footprint or the rucksack that we have. And I'm just wondering whether Junming or Hong Kwan might want to comment, because you're both from countries where there's very much a vision set and it's very top down in terms of how things are done. What is it that countries like Australia and New Zealand can learn from that sort of approach? Would any of you like to comment, Junming or Hong Kwan?
So I may share some thought as a start. So I think we from a cultural or I would say narrative perspective, we have to take a more nuanced perspective. We did some actually empirical research about how local residents and how local firms react to some national kind of guidance. Those are, to be clear, non-mandatory, just recommendatory guidance of as a circular practice, what we recommend as a benchmark for your industry sector, as a superior performance for like water recycling, waste recycling, and so on. And we find that there is huge variation in the regional reaction to the guidance, and basically it's associated with the culture. So interesting finding. One piece of it to share is that rice growing regions and wheat growing regions, they are totally different, because culturally some regions, the rice growing regions, people are historically they collaborate. So it's easy for them to accept some social norm and comply with the social norm. But for the wheat growing regions, people can work independently. So some of them just ignore, and that gene actually is inherited by the modern private organizations.
Yeah, very interesting. Hong Kwan?
Yes, thank you, Elsa. I think one of maybe let's say advantages of our system is maybe like we are a very unique system, and as long as putting from our top political agenda, then local governments or other following, so it's called like the whole political system engaged to work on that. But I think the challenge is I don't know other country, but like Vietnam, we are quite diversity in terms of regional the differences. So because of that, circular economy or circular business model is very context specific, and which makes the implementation at the local levels also challenge. And so I think we are trying to, let's say, mainstream it into economic plans and special planning but seems they still quite different, difficult. So that's why we call it the implementation gap between national vision to local implementations. And actually, we are still quite facing with this issue. Yeah.
Thanks, Angkwan. Lina, did you want to comment at all before we move to the next question?
On this.
Yeah, sure. Okay. There's a question from Simon Bennett, and he said to any panelist who feels confident to address it, to what extent do current global pressures away from international economic and political cooperation and the institutions that preserve this, and towards national self-interest present challenges to the growth of the circular economy? I don't know, Ashok, if you would also like to join in at this point, but is there anyone who would like to take this? Maybe I'll repeat the question. To what extent do current global pressures away from the international economic and political cooperation and the institutions that preserve this towards national self-interest present challenges to the growth of the circular economy?
Well, if you were asking me to intervene, I would say that the current pressures from systems of governance and thinking, which veer really towards autocratic, top-down, heavy linear thinking, there's a lot of pressure against circularity in the world. But circular economy, in its very nature, is a local issue. I mean, it's a local. The solutions are local. The perceptions, and as Tanya said, the community is where the real activity has to be, and community thinking is very important. So given what's going on today in Europe, in North America, and in other places, one has to recognize that the leaders of I would imagine more than 60% of the population of the world lives in countries where circular economy does not fit into the mindset of their leaders. And this makes it very difficult, really, to do much in those countries. But it shouldn't prevent people in other countries from doing this. I mean, it's true that international economic pressures are very heavy and they are very influential. But in the Asia-Pacific region, all the governments, from the richest to the poorest, have accepted the idea of circular economy, are committed to it, are committed to outcomes on carbon emissions and on resource management, which are reasonably rational. It seems to me that we've got to ride the crest. We've got to, the fact that the governments have made these commitments, whether they believe them or not, is the empowering and facilitating fact. And it seems to me that we will have people like the current leaders of several countries today who have a very, resource, how would you say, aggrandizement approach. We're going to have to deal with that by public pressures within their countries. And hopefully, if the mindset of the majority populations is about living a life that leaves the options for future generations in place, then it's really a question of what kind of ancestors do we want to be. And if people do think of their legacy in terms of future generations, and indigenous people do this all the time, they're thinking about seventh generation. Right now, that thinking has to be promoted, and maybe this behavioral change that she was referring to can only take place if if we appreciate it, if we, make sure that legitimate academic and legitimate, research people like the ones at this conference legitimize it, then hopefully people will start doing it. I see a lot of behavior in Canada, in New Zealand, in Australia, conditioned by the influence of local civilizations, of First Nations or indigenous people, and it's true to some extent, not enough, even in India, with the impact that tribal thinking has on our thinking. So I think that is where the future lies, in nurturing those communities that believe in community.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ashok. Would any of the other panelists like to comment on this question that was asked by Simon about the national impacts? I might put it that way. Tanya?
I think for me, we measure what matters, right? Most countries, we're all on GDP, which is all about clipping the ticket on everything that we make and want to sell. And while that is the main focus, and while that is what we measure, then that is what is going to be driven through all our countries until we actually start valuing and wanting things to last longer. And we're really lucky we're just getting a right to repair bill, which seems to be ridiculous. It's 2025. But until we can get to the stage where we are not encouraged to keep buying more and more stuff that we don't actually need, then I just can't see things changing. So what I'd like to see is a global recognition of actually GDP is the wrong thing that we should be measuring, and we should be changing that.
Yeah. Lynette, Junming, Hong Kwan, anybody would like to comment on this question? Because if not, I can move to the other one. No? Okay. This is a really interesting one and a good segue, Tanya, to your point. And this has come from Mattia Coven. Do you think circularity can succeed in current economic systems, or are these actually barriers to successful circularity transitions? Go ahead. Yeah.
I'll quickly jump in. What I found really interesting when we were at the World Circular Economy Forum the other year was what they recognised while they had this huge big pot of money for people to be able to apply for. Our system and how we measured it was still linear. So there was a lot of really good ideas going through, but because of the system and how we were assessing things, that they didn't get as much of an uptake as what they would have liked to have done. So I think if some of our system is restricting what we can do and how far we can push things. So I would like that financial institutions to really review what and how we're, what the opportunities are and what they're willing to back.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tanya. Any of the other panel members would like to comment on this? Lynette, please.
Maybe I can give it a try. So I think the goal is to find opportunities where these are not in contrast or, divergent paths. Ideally, of course, it's in reality, sometimes that's not true. But where possible, if there are cost savings to be made, or if there are ways to, elevate certain groups of populations while pursuing circularity, I mean, that should be what we're chasing thereafter. Yeah.
Yeah. Junming or Hong Kwan, either of you want to comment on this? No? Okay. Hong Kwan? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I think of course, I think if that was we was thinking about, let's say, just take standardizations as example on circularity. So if we use standardizations as a, let's say, a regulation for implementing circularity product, it can be a barrier because to really achieving those standard, it takes, like, for example, farmers or small enterprise, they find difficult to get those standards, and it make the barriers that they can bring their product into society, and it will make also difficult. But if also standardization, if we can do in a good way. For example, if we can try to include digitalization process, or we need some supporting program in going parallel with the regulation. And also, like I mentioned in about innovation related products, we really need government support or other support in the very early stage of this product before it can be, let's say, business scaled. Yeah. So I think regulation and initiative or incentive need to design and go parallel in local level, but can be also we can see it also at international level, at the trading things. For example, if we want to have our good product to international market, but how we can reduce the cost to reduce those barriers is very important. And then I think this make the implementation easier. Otherwise, it make become a barriers. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, right. Jinming, there's a question that's come, which I think would be perfect for you. I'm just reframing this question for the sake of time. How can circularity and systems thinking help cut food waste? And I think this is largely because of that example that you gave between rice and wheat.
Okay, so it's about how systems thinking and I didn't
How
get
can
the
it cut
other
food
part.
waste? Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's very important, and that's quite a good question, because, well, I think that's also why we need a collection of panelists here to discuss that. Well, circular economy, of course, it's not only needs technical engineering solutions, it needs some political economy knowledge about how different stakeholders have different interests, and also to know the decision-making process, and of course also on the operational side about how different business models can work in different areas. So well, for me, although we talk about best practice all the time, but I don't believe in best practice, because every region, every country, they have their most appropriate approach. So like my example in the rice growing and wheat growing regions, they need different approach. It doesn't mean that wheat growing regions they are not opt-in for circular economy, but they need some other ways to persuade. They need some other narratives so that they can change their mind, change their ideas about how to move forward.
Yeah. Great. We might just leave it there for now. We would like to take a photo of the audience, and I don't know how many screens we're going to have. So, Alston, can I get you to get everyone to put your videos on, please, if that's possible. You don't have to, but we would like to take a number of screenshots of the people that are part of this virtual conference today. So, Alston, can I hand it over to you to do that, please? Thank you. So I'm requesting everyone to put their cameras on and all your screens. I'm hearing clicks. Alston, is that right?
Yes, give me a second.
Tell me when you're done. Okay, so we might now move to the final part of our presentation, and I'm just going to share my screen again, just to sort of I've tried really hard to summarize what our keynote and our panelists have said, and this is by no means a fulsome summary of everything that you've heard today, but I just wanted to leave you a little bit with some of the points that at least I picked up, and hopefully they would help jog some of your thinking as far as the circular economy is concerned. You know, over and over, we have been reminded, and when we talk about sufficiency or footprint or the rucksack perspective, that we really need to think about the fact that we have only one planet, and that you know, we are in the midst already of a triple planetary crisis. So we have no time to waste. Whether you think about it rich or poor, or from the perspective of equity, Sustainable Development Goals 10, 5, etc., there's still the fact that we're not living equitably on the planet. Some are living better lives than others. Some are perhaps living too good a life than others, and therefore we need to start thinking about how do we bring this concept of circular economy, a very Western concept in my view, and the Sustainable Development Goals don't talk about circular economy, and yet there's a very intricate connection between the SDGs and the circular economy. There's also this thinking around, and I think this is something that is changing, you know, very much that learning from the global north, the global south, or from developed nations to developing nations. Really, it is about the other way around as well. We've got perspectives, social perspectives, economic perspectives, political perspectives from 5 different countries, 5 different regions. And I think this is something that we can start thinking about, particularly from a place-based perspective, because often circular economy is a place-based response. And there's a lot of learning that we can still have from First Nations without actually giving the sense of going back in time, but using that to support circular economy, whether that's from a technical perspective, from a digital perspective, from an extended producer responsibility perspective, or a circular economy perspective of thinking very differently, even in terms of an economic model. So with that, I'd like to now get you to do another poll, and I'll invite you, Alston, to share your screen, if you will, to ask this question. For those of you who are on QR codes, you can use the QR code. But again, those of you who are on your laptops, please visit www.menti.com and enter this code 55443843, and we'll drop it in the chat as well. Thanks. So hopefully everyone is able to get onto the website or use a QR code. I think this is a keyword or a multiple choice. I can't remember now, Alston, whether it was multiple choice or...
It's spontaneous answer.
Yeah, thanks. That's nice. We have exceeded, but we'd like more responses, please. Thank you. Assuming we still have the 90+ people that were there at the start, I hope so. 20. that's good to hear. We are helping PhD students. And we would not have been able to do this without our wonderful keynote speaker and our panelists. So we really are very grateful. So I'll use this opportunity to thank Ashok and Lynette and Hong Kwan and Junming and Tanya and the team at RMIT and at Monash that helped put all this together. Really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good.
Keep them coming,
you.
please. Provide us your responses. We seem to be stuck at 34. Perhaps, Alston, we move to the next one. Is that okay? Yes, so we just wanted to remind you that if you're not a member of CERN APAC, and if you would like to join, please get in touch with Alston Furtado at RMIT. We've also got the website, so you can provide, leave your details or contact through the website as well. Alston, if you want to just go back to the previous one to see this previous slide, just to see if there's any further updates from the 34.
Nope, it was 34.
34. Okay. All right. That's fine. I'll just share my screen now. I just wanted to, before the formal close, I wanted to inform you that we have our next continual conference session on the 22nd of April, and this is going to be on textiles. We have two on textiles, one on the 22nd of April and one on the 27th of May, and they're both 2 to 3 p.m. Australian time. So please make a note of that. Please get in touch with us if you have any further questions. So with that, I'll stop sharing and use this opportunity to once again thank our keynote speakers. Is there any final message that our keynote or our panelists want to share with the audience before we formally close? A single word, a keyword, or a sentence? Over to you. Ashok, I'll start with you.
Thank you. I think this is such an important subject, which is being really massacred at the policy level by many important, self-important countries. We need to now gather our forces, and I think this community is really critically important for making it happen, a more sustainable future. So thank you for the initiative, and thank you for all the inputs.
Thank you, Ashok. Who wants to go next? Yep, Lynette, please.
Yeah, quite similar message. So I see the value in a platform like this where we can have some knowledge exchange and learn from one another. So I think, in this journey together, we can, document knowledge, share knowledge, both in terms of the science as well as the practice. And then it's not just case studies like Jimin mentioned, right? It's not just best practices. We also want to learn what did not work for different sectors or different countries. So I think learning from one another would be great.
Thank you, Lynette. Jinming, Hong Kwan, Tanya,
Okay.
please.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Tanya.
I was just going to say, this is a really hard space to be in, and we should actually give ourselves a break and reach out, support each other, give somebody a call, share ideas, do whatever you need to keep going and keep fighting the good fight, because there's lots to do out there. And so I just say, keep adapting. Things will change. It'll get difficult. It'll get easier. Just, please keep going.
Thank you, Tanya. Jinming.
All right. I'd like to echo the previous speakers that, this is a wonderful event and wonderful platform. So as I mentioned that, we need interdisciplinary thoughts. We need diversity in practice, so that the conversation is very important.
Thank you, Junming and Hong Kwan.
Yeah, maybe also I share the sharing with other speakers. Maybe just one word, I think partnership among us, especially academy, but also across different actors. I think we really need to work together. Yeah, thank you.
Great. So I think in the spirit of this session, my keyword is collaboration. That's what we started with. It's supporting this community of practice, or the coalition of willing, or whatever you want to call it. And we do hope that you found some value in spending a bit of time with us today. And we do hope that you're able to come back and continue the online conversations. And we hope that, you know, these online conversations spark the thinking, not just in terms of what we need to do, but more importantly about the impact that we're trying to achieve. So with that, I'll formally close today's event. Thank you for your time. And we hope to see you at our next session on the 22nd of April. And that is going to focus specifically on textiles. And no doubt you'll hear from us. Please get in touch with us if you have any questions. And from me, Usha Runiga in Melbourne, Kulin Nation, Voi Vurong, Bun Vurong language groups, thank you very much for attending today.
Yeah.
Goodbye.